John Penrose. I am the founder of the Centre for Small State Conservatives. I'm the chair of the Conservative Policy Forum, and I'm also do a variety of things for other people, other think tanks, and a university or two as well. So a variety of different roles.
hmm
But delighted to be here this afternoon.
Yeah, well, as you saw yesterday, the hereditary peers bill went
Yes.
through, and yeah, the Conservatives. Yes, could you speak about your uh, ideas about that, and do you agree
Yes,
with the
sure.
bill?
So the Centre for Small State Conservatives, we've published a whole series of different ideas, all of them, as the name might suggest, around trying to work out how you deliver a smaller state in a way which is humane and creates a dynamic economy, but also a society that's good to live in. And one of the things that we've suggested. There's a whole range of other things to do with tax policy and benefits policy and all those other things. But one of the ideas that we've come up with is something which we call an aristocracy of talent. And that is saying, look, the honours system as it currently stands isn't quite as meritocratic as it perhaps could be. And in fact, if your viewers ask themselves, do I actually think that the honours system is for people like me? Am I likely, if I become incredibly successful, to be given some kind of an honor and recognition? And quite a lot of people think, well, it doesn't really matter how successful or not successful I might be. The chances of getting noticed in that kind of way are very small because it's kind of a magic circle. It's kind of a sort of a who you know kind of club rather than anything else. And what I think is that the honour system is a wonderful piece of our nation's heritage, but we ought to make sure that it's fit for the 21st century. We ought to update it. It ought to be really transparently meritocratic. So you know that if someone is given a knighthood or a damehood or an OBE or an MBE or anything, they are there because they've got it because they really earned it, and they deserve it. There's no favoritism. There's no mates rates or anything like that going on. And so the idea is very simple, which is to say, if we have for legal immigration in this country, we have a points-based system. So if you're a brain surgeon, you get given lots and lots of points and you're eligible to get a visa. If you are less skilled, perhaps you don't get quite as many. But if we have a points-based system for identifying and then admitting the brightest and best people who want to come and live in Britain from around the rest of the world, if we can spot with points-based system who those brightest and best people are if they're foreigners, why can't we do it for ourselves here, for Brits here at home? And so if you apply the same basic idea of a points-based system, you could have the same thing to work out whether or not you, Harry, are eligible for a knighthood or an OBE or whatever it might be. And if you're not yet, you could work out what else you'd have to do in order to get enough points to become eligible at some point in your future career. And it would be that everybody would know that if they're successful, they'll get recognised. And they'll also know that if they meet somebody who has got some sort of an honour, they're talking to someone pretty special because they have earned it and there's no question about it, and they have it because they deserve it.
What sort of things would contribute to the points, do you think?
So we'd have to have a sort of national debate to sort of refine this, but in principle, if you want to recognise the best doctors, the best teachers, the best business people, the best philanthropists, then you come up with some rather straightforward basic ideas. If you want to spot the best philanthropists, well, who's given the most money each year for the last 5 years, 10 years, however long it is, and you could do that either in terms of absolute pounds given or in terms of percentage of their wealth. And that's the sort of thing you need to discuss. Ditto for business people. Who has run the biggest, most complicated organizations and successfully and grown them and built them for the maximum number of years? Or if you're talking about entrepreneurs, who has created the most wealth from scratch, compared to all their peers? You can work this stuff out, and you could say to people, you can be nominated by anybody. So if I thought you were worth nominating for a knighthood, I could say, well, Harry does the following things. and therefore he ought to have this many points, and that should give him an OBE. And then at that point, someone will say, all right, well that looks reasonable. We'll just check to make sure that John Penrose isn't making stuff up about Harry and lying in order to get his mate through the over the hurdle. But those will be the kind of things that you look at, and teachers will be, the people who run the biggest and most successful schools for the longest period of time. Those sorts of things. But it ought to be transparent. It ought to be easily checkable, just that everybody knows that it's valid.
And would you include peers into that?
Well, so I would, but I think that what you've got to do first is you've got to disentangle the honour of being given a peerage from the constitutional question about who goes into the upper house to have a say in the way our laws are made. And the difficulty at the moment is that those two things are both sort of put together. So I would make getting a peerage as part of the honour system, but I would say if you want to put somebody into the upper house of Parliament, let's call them something else. Let's not call them my lord or my lady. That will be for people who have earned an honour. If you want to put in somebody because you think that they're going to be a brilliant legislator in the upper house, let's call them, I don't know, senator or alderman or alderwoman or whatever it might be instead. Give them a different title. You can then decide if you want to reform the upper house of Parliament or not. But that's kind of a separate point. And if we end up with their lordships, Lords reform being mixed up with honours reform, that it becomes all of a sudden a problem which is 2, 3, 4 times the size and much more complicated. So let's separate the two out. Let's reform the honours first. Let's call members of the upper house something different. And if you want to have Lords reform, that's fine, but come back and do it later.
How do you think the Centre for Small State Conservatives would appeal to young conservatives? Because I think a lot of young conservatives would view themselves as one nation, or, a lot of them are YIMBYs now.
Yeah. Well, the thing which is great about small state conservatism is that it isn't kind of within the conservative spectrum. It isn't left wing or right wing. It isn't sort of factional. Actually, most people, if they think about policy, reckon that a smaller state is a good thing in principle because it helps the economy and it helps wealth creation. And particularly because at the moment, given the fact that we have historically high tax rates and very high borrowings as well, a big government conservative solution is something which is just not on the cards for the moment. We've got to try and work out how you create a smaller state humanely. Now, there will then be legitimate differences, I think, between different flavors of conservative as to how you do it. That's fine. But we exist to try and put forward ideas about how you get from A to B, how you can produce this stuff. And actually, if you look at, for example, housing policy, you mentioned YIMBYs and that sort of stuff just now. Really important issue for anybody in the country, but certainly anybody under the age of about 35. We've just put forward an idea that basically says we think that there's a gentle density, build up, not out solution here, which is very much to do with a smaller state because it gets politicians out of the way of most planning decisions and still ends up with better looking, more beautiful, and faster built, safe but fast, and much more dynamic town and city centres. Now that means that you have a smaller state enabling houses to be built at a much faster rate. They are much better looking. They are things that people want to live in a neighborhood where they walk past beauty rather than ugliness all the time. But just building more means that it reduces the supply and demand, means that the price comes down and it becomes much more affordable. So that's a really good example about how small state conservatives overlap into we include everybody in the conservative family. And then the question is, well, how can we deliver it? The difficulty is that almost everybody in the conservative family says, look, we like the idea of a smaller state in principle. The question is, how do you deliver it? How do you get there? And the difficulty is that if you look at somewhere like North America and Trump's and Elon Musk's attempts to do this Doge thing, it didn't produce anything like the savings that everybody was expecting when he started. So that doesn't work. Ditto, I'm very sorry to say, if you take the Liz Truss approach of sort of turning everything off and sort of seeing who complains, that didn't work very well either, did it? So our motto is in fact slightly different. It says bigger citizens need smaller governments. In other words, you can reduce the demand for government, the need for government, if you equip your citizens with the skills, the abilities to be able to stand on their own two feet, to live proudly independent lives. Then it isn't a question of saying, well, I know you need help, but you're just not getting it because we're running a smaller state. That wouldn't be very caring. It wouldn't be very supportive. Instead, what we say is we can make it so that you don't need so much help from government, but we can only do that if we equip you to be able to live an independent life in the first place. And that means an awful lot of care on everything from education on through. But bigger citizens need smaller governments is kind of our starting point, and I hope that's pretty unfactional. Doesn't matter if you are on the right-hand end of the Conservative spectrum or on the One Nation end or anywhere in between. I think most people can sign up to that.
Do you think that's what Kemi agrees with, and do you think she's
Um,
producing policies along those
I,
ideas?
I think it'd be interesting to see. I mean, she's still in the early stages of rolling out policy ideas, as you know, um, and um, and she is very sensibly, I think, embarking on this big policy renewal program. One of the things that I do, I think I mentioned at the start, is I'm the chairman of the Conservative Policy Forum, the party's in-house think tank. So we are trying to make sure that we're the mechanism where members can contribute to the party's policy renewal process. Um, I think that uh, Kemi and the rest of her team will find it very easy to agree with an awful lot of small state conservative ideas, not least because there's no money. Because given what Rachel Reeves is doing to the economy, and given what she's done to the taxes, and given what she's done to borrowing, I'm afraid that it looks very likely indeed that whenever we next have a Conservative government, as is, I'm afraid, traditional after a Labour government has been in power, they will have messed up the economy something rotten, and they will have messed up the public finances something rotten. And we are always the people who have to turn up with a mop and the bucket afterwards and clean up the mess they've left. This one doesn't look like it's going to be any different, I'm very sorry to say. But it will mean that therefore small state conservative ideas will have to be a big part of what we do, because there isn't going to be any money for anything else.
Well, you mentioned the CPF and also Renewal. Has Kemi worked with the CPF for Renewal, or is it a separate thing itself?
They're sort of they run on parallel tracks, if I can put it that way. So the CPF is all about um, harnessing the wisdom of the conservative crowd from our members or from people who may not be party members but are conservative inclined, have conservative views. Um, but we're continuous. We've been around for many years, and we I hope devoutly hope and expect we'll be around for many more years as well. The policy renewal process is Kimmy saying this has to be that she's doing a one-off thorough sort of refresh. That's what the policy renewal is. We want to feed into that. But hers is a sort of bigger, broader, but one-off thing, whereas we are a sort of longer term, more continuous thing. And we're probably a little bit narrower because not everybody is involved with CPF, even though I'd like them to be. If anybody is watching your podcast who wants to be part of CPF, membership is free. And if you've got an idea that you're burning to get off your chest and it doesn't happen to quite fit into the policy renewal timetable, bring it to us and we'll try and make sure that it finds a safe home.
How do young conservatives get involved with the CPF? Because, you know, I think my association has a CPF representative. Is
Mhm.
there a way to do it online? Um,
Yes, there is. So if you go to our website, just Google CPF and you'll find us. You can sign up online right there, right then. That'll get you enrolled. And you'll find, I mean, some local associations have really strong, vibrant local CPF groups. Others have CPF groups which operate occasionally but aren't quite so frequent, and others don't have them at all. So what we try and do is make sure that we have online events as well. And then we're also setting up something called member expert groups. So if your members are particularly sort of well versed and experts in anything from defence to tax accountancy or whatever it might be, teaching, health. There will be, we've set up about half a dozen of them so far, and there will be more and more that we're creating. And they are kind of subject specific groups for people who are really into education, into university policy, into whatever it might be. So we aren't quite there yet. This is a new idea for us, but we're aiming to set those things up so that even if you are in a constituency that doesn't have a CPF local group, there'll be something for you in CPF online, which will be interesting and fun and challenging, and we'll be able to find like-minded people who are interested in the same areas as you.
How do you feed that back into the party?
So we are in a unique position. This is something which I think other think tanks would give their eye teeth for, in that if we come up with ideas, we can get them in front of shadow ministers. Now we're in opposition, and while we were in government, genuine government ministers, and their teams, and the CCHQ policy unit as well. And they may not always agree with what we're saying, but they will always give us a hearing because we're inside the tent for them. And so what we will do is, if we have an event and it comes up with three or four ideas, we'll make sure those get to senior people in the party, and we'll also send around a sort of digest to everybody who's at the event, saying this is what we sent in, just so you know, this is what sort of came out of the event, and here's how it's striking home.
I don't know if we've mentioned yet, but you were the MP for Weston-super-Mare for eight
I had that
years,
honour,
was
yes,
that correct?
for nearly 2 decades. Yeah.
And you were also the government Tsar for anti-corruption.
Yes.
What was your role, like sort of day to day?
So as the anti-corruption czar, rather
Mm.
than as yeah. So the anti-corruption czar is a slightly, well, it's a very interesting and I think important role, but it's kind of an odd thing. It was actually created originally by Tony Blair, would you believe? But successive prime ministers have found it useful, and you're kind of the government's conscience or the party leader's conscience, if I can put it that way. So um, it's one of the things which everybody finds when they're in government or when you're in opposition is that you get lobbyists coming and tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Can I have a word with you about X or Y or Z?" Um, and those lobbyists may be paid lobbyists representing commercial interests, or they may be religious lobbyists, or they may be charities lobbying for a particular point of view. Um, all of them deserve to be heard. In a democracy. You need to make sure that your representatives are not sort of cut off in some Westminster bubble. But you also need to understand what the axe that they're grinding is as well. And you may decide that it's actually something which is really worthwhile and a very important cause, or you may say, actually, hang on a sec, there's a bit of self-interest in what they're saying as well. So you need to understand all of that, and also there's always the risk of dirty money creeping into politics as well. So those sorts of things, the anti-corruption czar is supposed to act as the conscience and to say, I think we may have a problem here. Um, just take care, or you need to launch an investigation. The thing which the czar can't do is they can't run investigations themselves. And the reason for that is really it's actually been that way ever since Tony Blair set the thing up. But the reason why that's important is you don't want to have the equivalent of a sort of political commissar running show trials. That would make us into sort of Soviet Russia. That would be a terrible idea. So rightly, no anti-corruption czar, whether they're a Labour anti-corruption czar or a Conservative one, they've never had squads of police and investigators working for them. Their job is much more to act as the conscience and to say, we need to be careful about this, or I'm worried about that, or have we thought about how this might lead us in the wrong direction, and try and make sure that you spot problems before they turn up, or that we react properly when, not if, there's a problem. Because any organisation that is run by human beings will occasionally have ethical problems, right? It doesn't matter if you're, and that's everybody from the Catholic Church through to the Conservative Party and everything in between. And goodness knows the Labour government recently has had awful examples um, of of ethical compromises
Do you think
that it's
they've
found itself. Sorry?
do you think they've taken sufficient action against
No,
their
no, I'm afraid I
challenges?
don't. I mean, and look, it it's always easy to criticize the government of the day if you're in opposition, and it's and I would be the first person to say that the Conservative Party wasn't perfect when we were in government. In the end, I resigned over something which I thought we weren't dealing with properly. But I'm afraid that the Labour government has not been great at this so far. They've had problem after problem, and the current difficulty with Peter Mandelson's appointment as the ambassador to the USA, and who knew what when, and what they knew about his relationships with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, is just, I'm afraid, the latest example. But there have been lots of others with cash for all sorts of bits and pieces flying around. So no one is perfect, and every government needs to start with a heavy dose of humility, because when, not if, you find problems, because everybody will find problems no matter what, it isn't a question of will there be problems. The question is, how do you react when you find them? Do you react in an ethical way? And that's always difficult because no one likes to believe that their colleagues may be at fault or anything like it. But that's what the role is supposed to involve.
I mean, you mentioned your resignation. Lots of people don't understand what happened during Partygate, or what are your views on it? What do you think should have happened? Maybe because yeah.
Oh, I, I I believe to this day that actually we missed a trick, because if Boris at the start of Partygate stood up and said, "Do you know what? We got it wrong. We were all working flat out on COVID. We were working every hour God sent. Boris himself nearly died of COVID. He was on in accident emergency for a long time. If he just stood up and said, "Look, do you know what? We made a mistake, and I'm terribly sorry. This one got past me. We shouldn't have done it. I apologise, and we're going to do better next time." I think everyone would have said, "Do you know what? That's okay. We understand." And it wasn't. But there's an old political saying that it isn't the thing that you do in politics that gets you; it's the cover up afterwards. And that's actually the thing which was the problem with Partygate rather than anything else. But anyway, it's ancient history now, and goodness knows, Boris had huge strengths as well, and it's easy for people to sort of forget that as well. But yeah, that's in the end why I stood down, and it was as I said, it was something which I wish we could have avoided, and I think there was a better route. But yeah, it's easy to have 2020 hindsight now, isn't it?
Kemi at one of her last press conferences was talking about everybody registering to be a parliamentary candidate. Would you ever stand again?
Yes, I'm in the process of reapplying at the moment. So look, I mean, much will depend on the party and on the polls and all those things. So there's a lot of people who are considering it. But I work on the principle that, I mean, I hope a lot of people who are watching your podcast are also considering whether or not they want to apply too. Um, Given the state that the country is going to be in after the current government has finished making a mess of things, we're going to need all the talent we can get. And therefore, some people, I'm hoping that quite a lot of former MPs like myself who were battlefield casualties at the last general election will reapply. But I'm also hoping we'll have a bunch of new, fresh blood as well, and we'll need a blend of experience and fresh thinking. So what any successful political movement needs is talent.
What do you think we need to do to win the next elections, or what on a constituency level for anybody who might want to apply for, becoming a parliamentary candidate?
So um, I think there are a number of things that, as a party, we need to do. That this may be answering your question, but if it's not, then come back and sort of and point me in the right direction. As a party, I think that what we've got to do is to show that we understand and we've got a better recipe for a better tomorrow for Britain than, well, certainly than the Labour Party, but also because we have now a whole bunch of populist parties on the right and on the left. So the Greens are a new factor, new game in town. Reform is more established. In Scotland, we've got the SNP and so forth. Wales, it looks as though Plaid Cymru may be about to do better than it's done before as well in the upcoming local elections and devolved elections. Because there's, to varying degrees, a dose of populism in most of those other parties. I think that there is a really big opportunity for a sensible party that's got properly worked out ideas rather than populist ideas, ideas that will actually make a difference and which will work in practice, rather than reform taking over local councils and saying they're going to do a sort of local doge and then going, oh, heck, goodness me, it hasn't worked after all. We're going to have to raise council taxes even though we promised we wouldn't, which is what they've had to do. If instead we've got a properly worked out set of policies which are costed, which are practical, which people can see will make a difference, I think there's a huge gap in British politics at the moment for a party that puts that idea across. I think we're in the very early stages of it. Kemi has only rolled out a couple of policies, but what she has done has been properly costed and has stood up to being, kicked and attacked by political rivals. I think if we carry on doing that, most of the others haven't got an answer to it because they either have daft ideas that are silly. I mean, Zach Polanski, bless him, is saying that he would deal with the nuclear threat by going and having a jolly good heart-to-heart with Vladimir Putin. Well, bless, isn't that sweet? But it's just not going to work, and everybody knows it's not going to work, and it's complete hogwash. If instead we've got some properly worked through policies that genuinely stand up on our common sense and work, I think that it will not only show that we have sort of learnt the lessons about why we lost the last election and that we have sort of raised our game, and that will be important for people to see. And we can't just say we've done it; we've got to show we've done it, and this is how you show it. And it will also make a really strong and positive contrast with all the other parties out there. So I just think there's a really big, not quite open goal, but really big opportunity for our party. But it's easier to say than to do, which is why we need to get behind Kemi and help her deliver it. Now, was that answering your question, or were you asking something slightly different?
No, I think that answers it well.
Yeah.
What were your highlights of your parliamentary career? What was the best parts?
Well, apart from getting elected in the first place, because we won. I spent a long and very happy time being MP for Weston-super-Mare, which used to be held by the Liberal Democrats. It's now gone Labour. And when we first won it in 2005, that was in the days when the Liberal Democrats were a force in the land, and it was very hard to win. We won in total only 5 seats off the Liberal Democrats that year, and we were one. So that was a sort of a very proud moment for me and the entire team here in Weston-super-Mare. But in terms of stuff that happened since then, there are a couple of things which I hope will be good. One of them was, or two of them, when I was a minister, was I managed to list the Lloyd's of London building. I was Architecture and Heritage Minister, so I gave that a Grade 1 listing. I hope your viewers like the look of it, but it's quite a special building, so I gave that one listing. And I also took the decision to turn English Heritage, which owns places or owns assets, places like Stonehenge, Tintagel Castle, places like that, turn that effectively into sort of a second national trust. Yeah. And that will, if I mean, that's still a process that's ongoing now, but assuming it works as planned, and that will create a legacy which will outlast me and you and several more generations as well. So that's quite fun. And I guess the other thing which I was quite proud of, and I'm talking about national stuff here. There's a whole series of local things in Weston-super-Mare to do with improving the sea defences and dealing with drug addiction rehabs in Weston, which are locally very important. But perhaps the other thing which I really enjoyed was uh, cleaning up some of the when I was Constitution Minister, cleaning up the way we handled the electoral rolls to make sure that they aren't full of people who shouldn't be there, and they are full of everybody who should be there, because they were a bit they were a bit people were worried that they weren't as good as they should have been. And we passed some quite technical legislation, but actually it's kind of an important foundation stone for the quality of our democracy. So that's something which probably no one will ever notice, but the fact they don't notice it is a good thing because it means that everything's working the way it should. Sorry, long
Uh,
list. I hope that helps.
yeah. I mean, back to your Centre for Small State Conservatives. You've got a paper or thumbnail on the culture reset. How can the next sort of wave of MPs work together better than they have done before? Because that's also what Robert Jenrick was speaking about and what he blamed his leave on.
Yeah. So, just for the rest of your viewers, so if you go to small state conservatives, and you check under policy papers and policy thumbnails, you'll find something about a culture reset for the Conservative Parliamentary Party is what we're talking about here. And the reason why that's really important is that one of the reasons why the voters decided that our time was up at the last general election. It's not the only reason, but one of the reasons was they didn't think that we were working as a team. They didn't think the Conservative MPs were putting the country first, and that they weren't working as a team to do that. Now, there are a number of things that you can do, but anybody who's watching your podcast, Harry, will appreciate that teamwork is something which you can teach people how to do. The teams are forged as much as just sort of done by magic. And lots of companies, lots of sporting clubs, lots of organizations do things very, very deliberately in order to weld people together into effective teams. And the odd thing is that the Conservative Parliamentary Party doesn't do very many of those things that would be normal in companies or in the armed forces or in sports clubs or anything like that. Conservative Parliamentary Party doesn't do very much of that at all. And that's everything from having proper performance appraisals to say, if you want to be a senior minister or a senior shadow minister, here's what we've got to see from you. We can help you, we can train you. Here's the things you're good at, here's the things you're bad at. Here's the gaps that we can help you plug. Through to saying, if you don't work as part of a team, then it isn't that. So everyone won't just ignore it. They will say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but that isn't good enough. So there's a whole series of things which aren't black magic. They are normal bits of team building things which are absolutely standard and normal in most other organisations, which I just think that the Conservative Parliamentary Party could and should start to introduce. And they aren't radical, but they are just basic common sense. It's about time we got on with it, really.
Do you think this can be implemented in the next wave of MPs, or do you think it would take
Yes,
longer?
yes. Oh, easily. Yes. I mean, I'm hoping that they'll be doing it to with current MPs, not to, but with current MPs as well. But certainly, one of the things which I think a lot of newly elected MPs find odd is that if you've been working if you had a serious career in the world outside, and I hope that most Conservatives who stand for Parliament are good enough to have had a serious career in the world outside in whatever field they began in, you'll be surprised at how little sort of teamwork and collective you know welding together happens when you become an MP. So it would be it would be entirely normal to carry on doing that when you walk through the doors of Parliament on your first day as an elected MP. And most people would regard that as perfectly normal and what they're used to, whether they come from the NHS or from the army, or from a law firm or whatever it might be. Um, Most people would regard that as just something which is part of normal life if you've been successful elsewhere.
Is that not part of the selection process? Is there not a sort of camp, the sort of camp the MPs go
Yes, there
on,
is.
kind of?
Yeah, yes. So one of the things which we have always done as a party for as long as anyone can remember is we've always looked for people who can work and play in teams. So it isn't that we are selecting people who aren't capable of it, but you do then, having selected those people who could, when they then turn up, having got elected into Parliament, you need to make sure that they do. And that isn't something which just happens automatically. It's something which any organisation, a company, a charity, a public service can organise for itself, for its staff, and it can organise it well or it can organise it badly. But you're absolutely right to say we are careful to choose people who can work in teams. So let's make sure they do.
Another paper you have, energy that's cheap as well as green. Do you believe in
Mhm.
nuclear energy?
Yes, I do. But also, I would gently take exception to the idea of having to believe in nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a physical fact, right? Um, uh, and the only reason why I think people should be cautious about nuclear energy is whether or not it is doable economically. And everybody who I speak to seems to think we could do it a great deal cheaper than we are in this country. We have some of the most expensive, difficult, complicated rules on nuclear energy in the world, right here in the UK. And lots of other countries manage to do it a great deal more nimbly, great deal faster, and a great deal more cheaply. And it's a very useful part of their energy mix. My basic point, I think, though, is broader than that, which is even if you can do that for nuclear, I reckon that we should be choosing the cheapest, ideally low carbon, but we've got to see whether if the rest of the world will come with low carbon energy as well, because we're not, we're all on the same planet, aren't we? Um, but I think we should be choosing the cheapest energy that we can generate at a given level of greenness. And therefore, if nuclear energy is competitive on that basis, then we should absolutely, fill our boots with it. If, on the other hand, it turns out that some other form of energy is better because it's cheaper for the same level of greenness, whatever we decide as a country we want, then we should fill our boots with that instead. And nuclear isn't a question of believing in it one way or another. It isn't a religious decision. It's just an economic one. And that's where I think we have fallen down in the past is we have allowed all sorts of other things, particularly on nuclear, to get in the way. And if nuclear can compete on all fours on a level playing field with other kinds of energy for an equal level of greenness, then we shouldn't be afraid. We should just crack on.
Do you think what's holding it back or what's making it more expensive is the red tape around it and the regulation?
Yes, I mean, look, safety is important for every kind of energy generation. I mean, the risks of nuclear are serious, but you can have very serious accidents with other kinds of energy as well. Um, but you can deliver good standards of safety and of environmental quality at a much, much, much lower cost than we currently do in this country. So the important thing is not to compromise on those standards. The important thing is to deliver those standards and to do it in a way that is much cheaper, faster, nimbler, more digital than we are currently doing. How do I know that that's true? Because lots of other countries are doing it better than we are. I'm sorry to say. So it isn't as if you have to believe an unproven assertion from John Penrose or anybody else. Just look abroad and see which other countries do it, and many of them, I'm afraid, are just better at it than we are. And we have painted ourselves into an awful corner in this country over years.
Do you think we will win? Do you think we will win a large chunk of council seats in May?
I think this May is going to be very difficult, just because um, Kemi is now really starting to make progress in the polls on her personal ratings, and she's a woman, reborn. I've no idea what she started putting on her breakfast cereal in the morning, but she needs to carry on doing it. She's really impressing a lot of people, I think. That hasn't yet fed through a lot into the party's ratings. And so, I think it's going to be appallingly difficult for the Labour Party. I think it's going to be quite difficult for us until Kemi's personal ratings start to feed through into the rest of the party. And I think, therefore, that the populists we were talking about before, the Greens, Reform, people like that, will probably do rather better than I want them to in May. Um, but with any luck, we can make some progress in parts of the country. Yeah, I would hope we would do. There's some hopeful signs in places like London and elsewhere. But I think if we're really going to start to do a sort of, a big sort of tidal surge of rising Conservative support right the way across the country, then what we've got to have is Kemi's personal ratings starting to rub off onto the rest of the party as well. So with any luck, we'll make a bit of progress in May in some places, but I'm hoping it's going to be the start of a better story building from then on. And in the meantime, we'll have to put up with, Zach Polanski and Nigel Farage looking smug for a little bit longer until that starts to happen. Yes, I
Or
do. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know about links to Russian money, but his previous admiration for Putin is well known and on record. He's been complimentary about it in the past. He's backed away from it a bit more recently. Um, Ditto his admiration for President Trump, who really isn't everybody's cup of tea in this country either. So I just think that those instincts are, strike an awful lot of Brits as very odd, put it that way. Now, any links to Russian money would have to be proven first. So that would have to be you'd have to be tread very carefully until that point. But if it was, I think links to Russian money for any political party in this country would not be good. You can imagine why it would be extremely bad.
you've got better rail services.
Mm.
Do you believe in nationalising them again, or do you see the vision at least that the Labour Great British Railway has?
Um, I think it's terrible. I think it's an awful idea what they're doing. And the reason why is I just think that they have incredibly short memories, because the last time we had nationalised railways in this country, which is what, 40 something years ago now, it was awful. If you talk to people who used the trains a lot in those days, they'll tell you that the rolling stock was late and slow and old. The staff were incredibly demoralised. They were very heavily unionised, but they didn't like being employees at the state at all. It was not they weren't happy in their work, and there were horrible delays, etc., etc. Um, and and so I think that what we're about to do, what the government is about to do, is to jump from the frying pan into the fire. Because there's no doubt that the old franchising system had kind of run its course. It needed to be replaced. But going back 40 years to something which was an abject failure last time is, I think, more to do with Labour left-wing ideology and their union paymasters than it has to do with anything else, to do with providing a better rail service for you and I as paying passengers. And the really sad thing is that there is actually a tried and tested alternative currently working on British Railways that everybody likes when they get a chance to use it. It's called open access. The entire rail freight network works on open access and is actually a quiet but very significant success story in Britain. And there are a small number of open access passenger services too. So if any of your viewers have ever travelled on Lumo between London and Edinburgh, for example, or there's Hull trains, which rather predictably go to Hull, or there's Grand Central. Those kind of services run really well. They have really good performance. They are very competitive on price, and they're run on this open access model. And so the really sad thing is, if we had said either the last Conservative government, which I was trying to get us to do, or the current Labour government had said, we aren't going to go back 40 years to a failed model of renationalisation. We are instead going to take what we know works, because it's working now, and we're going to expand it. We're going to roll it out. We're going to make that the way that our our railways work. I think it would be a dramatically better and different situation. Sadly, I fear that the ideology has got in the way of practicality, and equally sadly, I'm afraid passengers are going to suffer as a result.
I mean, a lot of people when they have a bad train, they call for it to just be nationalised. But how do you expand the open access, or
So,
just expand it to make it better?
if you take a service like Lumo, Lumo runs on the same tracks as the franchise and soon to be nationalised services. But it provides an alternative. It's a separate company. It sort of rents the track space. It gets hold of its own trains. It hires its own staff, and it provides an alternative for people who want to travel between London and Edinburgh. And it's really popular, and it's cheap comparatively, and it's got good performance in terms of reliability and being on time and all those things. Um, so why can't we do that for if it works well between London and Edinburgh? Why can't you do it from there to York or to Liverpool or to Cardiff or to Southampton or wherever it might be? There's no reason why we couldn't just have those kinds of options available. And the point about it is that if you live, Harry, I don't know where are you speaking to me from? Which part of the country are you in?
Sussex.
Sussex. Okay. So what's your local train station in Sussex?
It's Sussex. What is it? Southern Rail. Southern Rail.
Okay. So if instead of at the moment, if Southern Rail makes if something goes wrong on Southern Rail, there's no choice. There's no alternative service that you can have. If instead you had four or five different companies all running trains through past your local station to various London but other destinations too, it would mean that if one of them had a strike or had a mechanical breakdown or a timetable meltdown or whatever it might be, the other three or four of them would still be working. And it might mean that the train that you were waiting for didn't turn up when you wanted it to, but there'd be another one along in 15 minutes time and you can get on that instead. If you think about it in the same way, it's basically the same as air travel. So at the moment, if you want to fly between London and Paris or London and Edinburgh, you have a choice of, I don't know, half a dozen different carriers between London and Paris, probably a slightly smaller number than that between London and Edinburgh. And there's no franchise, there's no nationalised a requirement. You have choice, and if you don't like what one of them is offering, you can choose another one. Why can't we do that for our trains as well? And that's what open access is. And it just strikes me as absolutely balmy that when you've got something that works really quite well, that we're saying, no, 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 we don't want to do that. We want to go back to something which worked really badly 40 years ago and make the same mistakes all over again. Why on earth would you want to do that?
Would you support the same sort of thing for the water industries, so having multiple water providers, etc.?
Um, well, so yes, oddly, you could, if you think about what happens with energy at the moment, and the energy sector's got all sorts of problems as well. But one thing that it does do reasonably well is if you or I want to have a different energy supplier, we can get hold of one quite easily. So if you want to switch to Octopus, then it's your right to do that. And if you don't like what Octopus is offering and you want to switch to somebody else, you can do that too. And nobody stops you, and it means that you can shop around for a better deal or a greener form of energy or whatever it might be. Um, you can't do that with water at the moment. And it's quite possible that some water providers, if you're a farmer with a reservoir in your an irrigation reservoir you're not using, might be able to supply water into the pipes rather cheaper than than the existing rubbish water company in your area. And at that point, Harry, you should be able to say, well, I don't want to have the existing rubbish water company in my area. I want to have water provided by this lot. And and at that point, you should be able to switch supplier. It all comes to you through the same pipe. It's all the same quality of water, but you're buying it from somebody else. Um, and there, the parallels with energy are quite good, and would be helpful, I think, definitely. Um, I think there's a bigger problem with how the pipes are being maintained and run, and how much we're all paying for that, how much leakage there is, and how many overflows there are, and that's why we're all worried about having sewage overflows into rivers and those sorts of things. Those sorts of things are different and would need a different solution. But at the very least, yeah, let's give people a choice of a water supply in the same way as you can choose your energy supplier today.
So sort of a demonopolization, sort of.
Yes, absolutely. But you've absolutely nailed it there, Harry. And the point about it is, yeah, as a conservative, I'm a free marketeer. And every conservative I meet, doesn't matter if they are a one nation conservative or much further to the right of that, everybody is a free marketeer in our party, and monopolies therefore are a bad thing, and they're a bad thing because they rip people off. You either get lower quality or you get higher prices, or both, if you have a monopoly than if you don't. So let's try and take on the monopolies. They are the vested interests, and if we can show that we're on the side of consumers, whether it's of water or of energy or of anything else, cars, cornflakes, doesn't matter what. If we are on the side of consumers, then A, our economy will grow faster. B, our jobs market will be better. And C, voters will love us for it because they'll know that we're on their side rather than on the side of the vested interests. My problem with the devolution settlements, which it was begun under Blair, that we haven't yet rolled out in the Centre for Small State Conservatives a devolution paper, although there is one in the works. So I shall offer you a small teaser to say there is going to be something on this quite soon. But just to sort of summarise the problem at the moment, most people, when they talk about devolution, they talk about moving decision making from one bit of the political arena into a different bit of the political arena. What they don't talk about is making the decisions better. Yeah. Um, and then if the decisions aren't better, then they come along and say, oh, well, we're going to move them from a police and crime commissioner to a regional mayor. Well, why is that going to be any better? I mean, what is it that's actually going to make a difference there? And so what worries me is that you end up with an awful lot of people who don't raise the money. They aren't responsible for levying the taxes, which raise the money that they spend. Um, and and therefore, what they do is they spend their entire time with their hand out, blaming Westminster for all their problems, um, because they don't actually have to raise the taxes. So that all that they want to do is to spend more money because it doesn't cost them anything politically. And I think that's a very dangerous place for us to be. And it also means that you end up with with policies which aren't necessarily economically responsible. And you don't have accountability because ultimately, if someone's going to spend money on my behalf, I want them to have raised the taxes from me so that I can vote for them. And if I don't like what they're doing and I think the taxes aren't being spent properly, I can vote the rascals out. But if you have the spending separate from the tax raising, which is what's happening in quite a lot of our devolution settlements, um, then at that point you're in a very dangerous place, and that's what worries me at the moment. And I just don't think that anybody's really fixing that. And I think it's something which is important. And the odd thing is that I'm a big fan of lots and lots of local councils that do have to raise taxes. They may not raise all the money that they spend, but they raise a goodly chunk of it. And an awful lot of councils are really pretty efficient. They're not all perfect, and goodness knows if they're not run by Conservatives, they're even less likely to be perfect. But local councils are often pretty tightly run ships. Not always, but often they are, and so particularly Conservative run ones. And they, I think, show what can happen if you get good local people who are practical and who are dedicated to making their community better, but they know that they have to look their neighbours square in the eye and say, I have raised your taxes in order to raise more money, but the reason why I've done it is because we get that over there, pointing at whatever it is they spent the money on in exchange. And if they can justify that to their neighbours, that's a much healthier, devolved settlement than something that says, I spent a load of money and I'd have spent even more if it wasn't for those beastly people in London who won't give me any more. And that's just fundamentally not a healthy place, I think, for any democratically elected person to be.
I mean, unfortunately, it's happening here in Sussex. But we have the great Katie Bourne who's running. What do you think? Things like the water industry and the train lines can be done by the mayor, or even just put pressure on in local areas?
Well, I
Because
think I, I think a good a good Conservative local mayor will probably be better than some of the other parties. Absolutely right. Yeah. But I think my argument would be for something like trains. Actually, you don't want to have politicians involved with them very much at all. If you're going to go to an open access model, it's all about passenger power. It's about passengers making decisions about which of the 4 or 5 different services through your local station they want to take. That doesn't take a politician to make a decision about it at all. It takes a politician to set up the system so that you can run 4 or 5 services. But that wouldn't be that that's already happening in some places anyway. So roll that out and then get the politicians out of the way. You end up with a smaller state with less political meddling and happier passengers because you don't end up with politicians telling them what to do and which train to take.
do you have any final messages or?
I guess the only thing I just say is, um, as we mentioned earlier on, this whole idea about small states and having bigger citizens needing smaller governments just strikes me as an idea where whose time has come because we have high taxes already in this country and they're going up under the Labour government. So they're historically at a pretty high level. Because we have high borrowings in this country and public finances, government finances that are under really serious strain already. It just strikes me that the scope for even bigger government will be very, very small indeed for the foreseeable future until we have fixed those problems. And so the only answer, I think, is a small state. And if you look at what happened under, for example, Margaret Thatcher, what she did was a whole series of supply side reforms to make the economy and the country work better and more efficiently. If we can do those again, or the modern equivalents of them, then you end up with something which has the huge advantage. Supply side reforms don't cost taxpayers very much at all. In fact, if anything, they can save them an enormous amount of money, and you get a huge electoral bounce from them as well. So I just think there's a big opportunity here. If anybody wants to come and join in, sign up, and we'll send you details. And equally, if anybody's got an idea elsewhere in other parts of the political spectrum, which they want to put forward to the party's leadership, join CPF. As I said, it's free, and we'll make sure your ideas get noticed and get in front of the leadership.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Harry.